hang with me. Sometimes you just have to go argue with your Google Drive and hope to God it's there.
Well, we're going in now. We're getting into the room, and yeah, we'll have a little look at that. Well, good evening, everybody. Great to see you all. Well, been excited about this for a while, so I'll let you all kind of come on in and say hi. Make sure you say hi when you come in, so I can see you there. This is always the big awkward bit. Susan, how are you?
I am absolutely fine. Summer's coming. It's warm. There's flowers. The bees are out. The hummingbirds are out. Everything's good. It's all good.
Well, we're supposed to, we have a very British summer already. So we did actually have a couple of days of sunshine, but that could be as far as we get this year. Who knows? It's gone very, very wet and damp again. But great to see you. Thank you so much for coming and joining us in the group tonight. Oh, everybody's flooding in now and saying hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Heather. Hi, Fran. People from all over. We've got South Africa. We've got Surrey. We've got Detroit. Yeah, say where you're from as well, so we can see where you're from. And I know there's been a huge amount of interest for this, and we've been looking at trying to get you to come and speak in the group. And we spoke privately and had a really good conversation, which could have gone on for a lot longer, I think. But both of our husbands were getting to the point that they needed us. So I know this is going to be a great conversation today, Suzanne. So I know a lot of people have been I want this to be a real celebration, actually, of a lot of things that you've gifted us as a community, the dog training community, and also to find out more about you as a person, because I know there's a richness there to your own story. We'll come on to that in a mo. A lot of people will have been very influenced by your writings, and Bones Would Raid from the Skies, obviously a seminal piece, which really, what I loved about that book was the storytelling nature of it, really creating a story around our relationship with dogs. It wasn't another training manual, if you like. It was a way of really thinking about, how do we look at this? What does this mean for us? Looking at those kind of really important questions. So let's make a start from the beginning, really, then, Suzanne. Where was your early influences for you regarding how you perceive these relationships with not just dogs, actually, because obviously you've got a life of being surrounded by animals more generally?
So my mother's quite convinced that I learned to say, to speak English in any format just because I wanted to be able to say I want a pony, Like, the only good reason to develop language is to immediately begin insisting that animals should be brought into the household. So from the get-go, there was nothing animal nature that wasn't of interest to me. One of my first pets was a little frog that one of the board colonels at the Pentagon would catch flies to send home with my mother. She was his executive secretary. So I like to think of the American tax dollars at work with a very bored full bird colonel collecting flies from my pet frog. But I would steal the neighborhood cats and dogs. I would sit which is a long time for a 4-year-old, sit on a stoop trying to be so still that a squirrel would take a nut from my hand. And that was just a weird goal I set for myself, just because I wanted to see if I could get the animal closer. I wasn't trying to lie to them, like, come closer and I'll try to pet you. Just the thrill of having an animal or a bird or an insect be that close to me where I could just observe them was, and still is, like, ridiculously thrilling to me. It's just like, I'll get carried away talking to the spider in the shower, because I tell her, I've known your great, 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 28 years of spider generations. I've known your relatives and waited every year. We're probably one of the few households that are like, the spiderlings have hatched. And my husband and I are both delighted that the shower is full of hundreds of tiny babies. So anything goes with me if it's breathing. Yep. It's of interest to me.
Apologies to my husband if he's listening in because of the mention of spiders early on. It's a work in progress there. I'll have to link you in with there. But I used to have a bit of a thing with spiders. Until I worked with a client with their dog, and he was the chair of a local kind of group that looked at arachnids and that kind of thing. So his front room was full of them.
Oh, cool.
Guess how I got through my own kind of phobias? It was through the fascination of them and him being really inspiring and being really kind of enthusiastic about them and building things up over time with me, because then I could think, actually, I can really feel your own lived experience as the spider now. Now I can connect with you. It's about connections. So when we think about that, then from such a young age, then you had this inherent need or want to connect to these wonderful animals. Do you think that came from somewhere? Are you an only child? Are you?
Oh God, no.
No.
No, no. Like many of us, I came from a family. Yeah, my dad, my biological dad, who I did not really know, apparently, grew up in Texas and showed his pet pig at the state fair. And when he abandoned my mother, he left her with a big tray of earthworms and composting, way ahead of his time. So that seems to be a a genetic trait. Animals everywhere, and then yeah, some big ass ideas ahead of your time, which is fine. So very possibly that came from that. But my maternal grandmother was the one that everyone in the neighborhood would bring, we found this kitten, or this is a sick baby bird, or, she always had lots of animals around her and was kind of the fix it, repair it, nurse it back to health kind of woman. So yeah, there's probably a genetic component there. My mother loved animals, but she had no desire to have her house filled. It was already filled with 4 kids, so the
Yeah.
thought of having a lot more chaos had limited appeal to her. And yet she let me, when I was 14, run a boarding kennel out of the basement. I would take people's pets and board them. So it was pretty cool because every week or two I had a different dog. But who lets a kid do that? My mother's like, well, it really matters to you and you're responsible, so have at it. I was like, okay. It was a funny
So
way to have dogs. Mhm.
was that your first semi-professional little trip into working with animals then? When you were taking those dogs in, all those cats or whatever?
No, I got paid at age 8
Go.
to do something that I was going to do anyway, which is take this lovely collie Chip for a walk around the block. And then I like to brush him. And then I would, carefully scrub out his water bowls. And the woman was like, well, that's really great. So here's a quarter. I was like, that is an interesting concept. Not that the money changed one bit. It did not be like, oh, now I really want it. It's like, I would have done this for nothing. To this day, I would do it for nothing if I was independently wealthy. I mean, I guess you have to have some value exchange there, but I don't know. I Yeah, money has never been the driving force for me. To my detriment, I'm just gonna say it's not the best policy for life as you get older, but what the hell? I'll die a happy girl.
Well, that's important. I think we have to find our purpose, and we've got to earn some pennies along the way. But I think it's important to, they say there's a difference between standard of living and quality of life, and it's always a bit of a kind of a juggling thing, isn't it? So when you think about then those early relationships with the animals, however they would find their way to you,
Hmm.
I've got a very kind of Mary Poppins vision in my head now of little tweeting sparrows coming and sitting on your palm and the squirrel by your feet and that kind of thing.
Well, no joke, because I would lay in the yard in the winter and be just, prostrate with my hands out like I've been crucified in the snow and filled my palms up with birdseed so that I could actually get them to feed. Yes, like that had great appeal to me. Dr. Doolittle, of course, is one of my great heroes. Of course, you would just have an entire house full of animals and a duck as a housekeeper because ducks are really messy people. So I thought it was the perfect housekeeping animal. Like they're just going to make a giant mess wherever they go. So perfect, perfect, perfect. Um, yeah, no, I was not an only child. I was one of 4. And mm-mm. We've lost the question. What were we talking about? A house full of animals. We've got that on board. Oh, the relationships, right? Like why did I want to have an animal there? I wanted I wanted an interaction, and then I recognized that I really had no specific value to that animal unless I did something. I wasn't willing to take them captive by any means, but I was willing to sweeten the deal a bit. This is for you. I ask nothing in return other than if I sit really quietly and politely and respectfully, can I just watch you close? That's all. It was that wanting to close the distance or to have a longer period of time where I could observe them. But I was just as happy watching bees, come and go, or watch ants on an anthill, that I didn't have to interact with them. That there was a relationship possible, that appealed to me immensely. And then I think in any relationship when you're a kid, don't you think there's some attempt to exert some control over another beings? My mom remembers me trying to train, like, I don't know, 5 dogs at a crack that I'd stolen from the neighbors. And of course, trying to teach 5 dogs to do a sit stay all at once when you're 6 or so is quite a challenge. And I'd get 2 to stay and then 4 would wander off. And my mother, she said she often would watch me out the window and just think, should I go help her? Should I interfere? Should I redirect that? Or she seems to have it under control. So she just, none of the dogs were going to bite me or anything. I wasn't anything stupid, but you learn that even if you're like, stay, 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 the dog's like, whatever, kid, I'm out of here. So as you get older, you're like, well, why did that happen? And wait, why did that work so well? And that was fun. Like when me and that animal did this together. Even in my little mouse, Sergeant Pepper, you know, taught him some very basic stuff. And it was just really cool to have this little mouse who's like, yes, and are we going to do that thing? Yes, I enjoyed that. So I don't know. That was just there isn't a bigger dopamine burst for me, actually, I don't think, than the connection with animals or someone I really love. I mean, I enjoy all connections, but I'm an introvert, so.
And that's what I hear, actually. And I think that's the power, because there's clearly that young Suzanne really wanting to be present and observe, but also seeking that connection. And I think that the young developing brain seeks those connections. We actively look for those secure attachments, if you like. And it's amazing how many people find some of those first secure attachments through their relationships with animals, actually, because maybe it's less complicated. Maybe it can be a bit two-way. Maybe we can have a say in the outcome, because like, if I do this, will you do that? Whereas we can find that hard with our siblings, of course. We can find that hard with our family when we're being just seen as a child or the annoying.
Yeah.
You were an annoying sister, but I'm sure my sister would say I was an annoying brother. But yes, I think there's an interesting dynamic there, isn't it, in the relationships we can form with animals quite early on.
So I came into the world that way, like even as a little kid. If it was animals, even before I was pre-verbal, if it was an animal, that's where they would find me. But we have the inconsistency of a severely bipolar mom who, multiple times was hospitalized, back in the days of shock therapy and all that horrible stuff. So I did have stable adults who made for secure attachments. But I think that probably just underlined with me that animals were certainly consistent. I never did encounter an animal who just out of the clear blue lost it, had a psychotic break and had to be sent away for months on end. That was true of my mother, but never had an animal do that. If they got angry or they bit me or they stung me or whatever they did, clawed me, yeah, it was like, huh, so what did I do to create that? Did I do something to create that? Because that's the problem when you have a mentally ill parent. One of the messages is it's something I'm doing. If I was just a better kid, if I didn't tell those white lies, if I didn't break that thing, or if I had come home on time, maybe things would be different. Maybe I'm contributing to this. When in reality, as an adult, you understand this is you're just one of a tiny set of straws on that camel's back. But animals, I could almost find a reason why, including just stupid, like you're stubborn. You're a stupid dog or horse, or you're a mean bee that stung me, fill in the blank. But I always was quite clear that it was a two-way street, that I had some culpability in the relationship. that, you know, they're not going to just attack you for no reason. They're not going to sting you, bite you. They're not. There's no point in that. They're not randomly violent.
Thank you for sharing that, and especially about your mother, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people listening in, I think, and especially as a young brain, how we try and navigate what might be happening and the different kind of stresses and strains for the adults around us, and trying to make sense of that can be challenging. And I think there is a simplicity with the animals, as you say. It's like, yeah, I could probably see why that might have happened, and also there's the opportunity for many of the animals to try again.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of find what works, because we're going to come forward in time in a bit, obviously, to the work you've done with dogs, and the importance for you about building that relationship, having a relational model. But I can see now where a lot of that has been kind of paved out a little bit from those early experiences about how you were trialing those relationships with many animals, actually, and the notion of being present with them.
Yeah, when they brought my baby brother home, I was so annoyed because I had some really good earthworm observations going on in the puddle on the sidewalk, and they came from the hospital and they had flowers and everybody was all excited, and they're like, "Don't you want to come and see the baby?" And I thought, I'm busy here. I've got some really big fat earthworms who are like struggling to handle this puddle. And I want to see how they work it out. So I was forced to go in. I'm like, all right, yay, hello, little fella. Okay, can I go back to my worms now? Um, so a different value system than I think they were hoping to encourage in their daughter. He's a nice brother. He's a lovely brother, but not an earthworm.
That little story there with the earthworms really resonates for a lot of the things that I've read and heard from you in your work with dogs specifically, as seeing learning as both part of survival and also about learning to cope. There's also coping.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really evident, obviously, from looking at the worms, looking at the bees, looking at those animals that are kind of that are less domesticated, I suppose, and then thinking about that in relation to the dogs, of course, because we put a lot of expectation on dogs and the things we want them to do to kind of perform. But a big
Right.
part of their brain is also thinking survival and coping.
Yeah, I think the interest in wild animals actually made me more respectful of dogs, because if my only interaction with animals had been domestic, right? And so everyone's like, well, you teach your dog this and he does that. And, you know, that's how that little box of perform as we'd like you to, and then you're a good dog. Um, I had tons of animal interactions that had nothing to do with what I wanted or how I thought they should act. Like I said, it was just, if I'm sitting here very quietly, if I'm very careful, if I bring you some gifts, can I just observe you? There was no expectation of interaction. It was just the privilege and the honor of being able to observe and learn from them. Very rarely did I ever try to interfere with a wild animal in any way. It was just, what do I have to do to get here? So I think I think you're right. If I'd had nothing but domestic experiences, I might have a much different or much more rigid box I would have put animals into, versus the privilege to me of having domestic animals is I get to live with them up close and personal, and they can sleep with me, and I can touch them whenever, you know, I want to say whenever I like, but I breed really sociable dogs for a reason. But I always respect whether or not they would like that. I'm looking at my old girl who's like, don't get all huggy. She does not believe in PDA. She's like, God, like, just go find the puppy. She likes hugs.
I just love what you just said there. It's really powerful, and it's a reminder, I think, of why we've got to try and move the dial a little bit, and shift and support, especially caregivers, owners, to thinking about more of a relational model, because we do have the privilege of that closeness with the animals we share our lives with. And it's a shame to kind of not throw away, but like be blind to some of that privilege, because of that we've got this notion that they, that kind of compliance thing, they've got to do as they're told, and all the kind of things that we can fall into. And I think the general public, I can only talk here in the UK, but over the last 30, 40 years, it's a relatively new phenomenon, really, but they have been convinced that the most important thing is a well-trained, obedient dog. And that starts to create some barriers to that relationship. Then if you're asking things of a dog who can't do stuff, and now you're thinking of them as being disobedient, willful, stubborn, whatever else.
Yep. Or just not having value. He's a bad dog.
Yeah.
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 I'm I think the day that I ever take for granted that I live with animals, that I can just walk out into a pasture and a 1,000-pound critter will walk over just to say hi, what's going on? Not because I brought him any food, not because I brought him any, it's just because I showed up and we're like, oh, we're hanging. That just blows my mind, and it has blown my mind for my whole life. So at 65, I'm still just like so tickled that I can get a donkey hug just because I asked for one, or that I can walk through the woods. You know, a lady once asked me, I had 11 dogs at the time, and she said she was so impressed because we took them for an off-leash walk on the farm. And she said, I'm just so impressed. How do you keep 11 dogs with you and they don't run off? I was like, 11 German Shepherds? That's not even a trick. I was like, no, tell me I can make 11 German Shepherds go out of sight and stay out of sight while I'm in motion. That would be training. That would be past my capacities for sure. But just to have that relationship where you're so central to that animal, or not, it depends on the animal. And my pony Cricket, she's like, are we going to do something? Because we're going to do something, I'm with you. But if we're just going to like have huggy kissy time and you're going to brush out my tail, last time I brushed her, she's like, you did half. Okay, that's enough. I'm like, I'm now a before and after pony. I'm like, but wouldn't it be nice if we hung out and I could groom you? And she's like, no, I really don't care how I look. And no, I'm done with the touchy feely. Where my other horse, I could rent him out to children who wanted to, put glitter on his nails. He would be ecstatic. He just loves spa day, loves him some spa day.
And isn't this a beautiful thing? I think we can really start to dive in, I think, on a lot of your work that you've done and gifted us as a dog community. Really, I'm thinking about relationships. Obviously, we have your relationship centered training notion, but you're finding a balance booklet. It's an older one, I know, but it was a really brave book, and because but still resonates for me now, Suzanne, because what is a relationship? So a relationship, as you pointed out in there, is yes, I care for my dog's care and support needs. I want to see them, but I have some too. And if this is going to work as a relationship, I need to communicate. So if I'm going to give you a voice, I need to find a voice myself, and we have to find that balance. And I think that's the kind of general spirit of it. And I think if we're going to think about having a relationship, we shouldn't dismiss our side of it either. And I think that can be looked at sometimes as though our own needs to communicate, our own wants regarding what our own safety needs, but also our own perception of the safety for the dog. All these things are really important as part of that relationship. It's not just catering for the dog wholly or the animal wholly, I think.
Well, anytime we cater wholly to another being, we're not in a relationship. There's some other dynamic there that very often has nothing to do with the other being and who they really are. It's our need to serve or be subservient, or who knows what. I'm not going to get into the human dynamics of it, but that's a bigger need on this end than it is ever about the animal. I think that would be unhealthy. I watch parents do that with children. I watch people do it with their spouses. It's like, you've lost some healthy balance there. And when you say that it was brave to write it, people are like, I don't think you should have that in the title, the balance of power, and it's like, it is about issues of power. There's no such thing as a relationship where there is a total equality of power. It's actually not, I don't think, possible. I think there's moments of complete agreement. We're like, yeah, we are absolutely on the same page. And those are the moments that all of us live for, whether that's with a dog or a horse or a partner, that feeling where I'm not sure where you end and I begin, but we're both on the same damn page
Yeah.
is exquisite. It is absolutely exquisite. And then there's times when you're like, it's not actually what I would have preferred, but you know what? I'm with you. So, okay, that actually trumps everything else. Yeah, I'll go this way, or I'm feeling generous today. I would not normally want to go garage sailing with you, but yep, you're a flea market junkie. So every now and then I'm going to do it with you. And we would hope for that same tolerance for ourselves, but we still don't have a right to expect it. Like what we give, what we demand. With the dog, we have a specific set of issues that I think people tiptoe around way too much, which is you do have control over this dog's life. And people proudly say they don't use coercion. It's like, so you have no leashes, no collars, no fences, no barriers. Well, that is awesome. What island do you live on? Years ago, I had this chat with Nikki Tudge because I wouldn't sign the code of ethics for PPG because it said, I will use no force or coercion. And I was like, so I would like to see, you need to show me how you're achieving that because I'm really interested in that concept. It's like, well, no, we do recommend, equipment. I'm like, oh, okay. So some coercion is okay. Some use of force is okay. And what it really came down to is the use of force is there not to hurt or intimidate or, scare, frighten the animal. I was like, okay, when they rewrote it, then I signed up. But we do have tremendous control. And I think, I don't know, you tell me how it goes in the human world, but man, if you start to talk about status or dominance, the people's heads just fly off. It's like those are such loaded words. And I think you should do more reading on the topic. And so that exists in my experience. Many times they've read something quick on Facebook or they read a quick, reprisal thing that Meats changed his mind and Alpha is really about who mates in the pack at the end. It's like, but that does not address dominance. If you want to talk about it, go read all the great studies done in human social interactions and dynamics, the dominance hum. Like watching someone, you can do this with neuro linguistic programming, right? You can take advantage of this. You can speed someone up, you can slow someone down, you can match their tone and their tempo, and then you can start to shift it and model it. You can do all that stuff. It's so complex, these interactions, and it is, in my mind, it's not about who's alpha. It's about, are we on the same page? That is the perfect alignment of my needs, your needs, my thoughts, your thoughts. We are as one. And that can fade fast. That can last for a minute. It could last for hours. It could last for days. But then something's going to pull it apart. And that could be, I want to go for a walk in the rain. You're like, if I go for one more walk in the rain, I'm going to shrivel up and die. I'm not going. Take the dogs and have at it. But no, I'm not going out there. And same with the dogs. So we can be cooperating and finding points of compromise where we're both like, yes, that's a good meeting point. We can both agree on that. It's not totally what we had in mind. Or we're actually in conflict mode. I mean, we're in one of the other. We're aligned. We're not perfectly aligned, but we're in agreement. Or no, we're degrees apart and not necessarily a clear way to go to find the answer. And we do use the control we have over dogs to solve it. It's like, well, then I'll put you in a crate. Well, then I'll put this piece of equipment on you. Well, then I just won't give you your food, or I'll make you earn it with every bite, or any of the many ways we attempt to coerce our dogs into working with us.
And there's a human psychology kind of saying, which is the path to coercion is often laid with good intention.
Mhm.
And I think that's this is a really powerful bit of our conversation here, I think, because especially for us who want to do things more kindly, more humanely, and kind of have things with more cooperation, we can't deny the fact of power imbalances at times. We can't, even if we think about those kind of relationships, and I think deference is a good word for us to use more. recognizing that there has to be a deferential element in relationships at times. So, you know, my husband and I were in the process of doing our home up, and we have to defer to each other sometimes because we can't quite agree on everything that has to go in there. So we have to find our way. And I think it's the same with our relationship, especially when we have some charge over another who is more vulnerable. And I think it's about intention ultimately, and about desired outcome, and finding that middle place, as you say, because we have to think about that. And that's a healthy conversation to have, especially in relation to a more relational model.
I think the talk that's now at a certain edge in the training community is getting a lot of coverage here is, how many degrees of freedom do we have? How many? If there's only one correct answer, you have 0 degrees of freedom. If you can choose one of 2 things and they'll both be correct, you have 1 degree of freedom. So I'm beginning to impress upon my students, before you ask something from a dog, be very aware if they have no degrees of freedom, then it's not really a choice. It's just a velvet glove, approach, ushering in them to the only conclusion you would like them to reach. So it's like, it's your choice. It's not really a choice. The only correct answer is get in the crate. It's not your choice. So a friend of mine was talking, he's working on a big open mouth hold for the wolves, but he practices first on his 2 goats. And so goats lacking the incisors, he got a little carried away, and he just opened the mouth bars, 2 bars, that she's grabbing like that, so they can see teeth and get wormer down her throat and all that stuff. And he just went too far in, and she's like, for the love of God, dude, back it up a bit. And so she took her mouth off the bars and she looked at him, and the clear communication was, I don't want to run away from you, Ryan, and I don't want to like headbutt you or get angry with you. I just need you to not do that again for a bit. So she went over and she gave him a chin rest. And then she chose to go over and do, a leg target. And she's like, I'm still working with you, but let's give that a break for a minute. And she was right on all those choices. All of those earned her a reward because he could clearly see what it was. But I think sometimes we don't actually trust the animal. So if we don't have trust and we're in a position of greater power, that is a very unhappily balanced crown, which can go bad. So that when we don't trust them, when we don't get what we think they should do, instead of seeing it as a compromise, we're going to have a different response. I just finished a consult this morning where what they described and what I saw in the dog, I was like, you have physical issues. This dog's in pain, actually. So let's follow that and resolve that. And when I pointed it out, the woman was like, oh, God, well, yes. And so when the dog's reluctance to sit came out of, this is not comfortable, my knees don't really work well. But she said she was just being defiant. And she said sometimes the dog would lay down and bark at her or stand up and bark at her. Because the poor dog was like, I get what you're asking me to do, but I can't do it in that position. But that's not how she read it. So when we have this authority and we have this greater balance, like she needs to do this, which is what the other trainer had told them. She has to sit for everything. And this dog was like, are you flipping kidding me? Like, why don't you pick the one thing I actually really cannot do? That's why I hate that advice, sit for everything. First of all, it's a dollar store mentality. Let me guess. I mean, how much cognitive effort has to come on board for that? But as soon as I shifted it to, no, she's actually trying to communicate to you and she's not leaving. She's perfectly free to leave the room or bite you. She has bitten them. But she didn't. She's standing there looking at you and she's offering a different behavior. Like, I'm here. How could I do it this way? So as soon as I said that, then suddenly that just opened up multiple degrees of freedom for this dog. Many ways to be right.
Another really powerful point there, and that's a great little example with that that client today, this notion of how often we don't trust the animal, because we talk about trust a lot, about how we build trust up because we want the animal to trust us. But that's a really profound question, isn't it? But do we trust the animal? Do we trust the animal to know their own mind, know what they need to do? I use the painting analogy with behavior about the animal, the dog, painting their picture with their behavior.
Mhm.
Yeah, we are often kind of motivated to want to keep grabbing the brush off them because we think we can paint the picture better for them, you know. But that's a really powerful point, and I think especially, you know, there's a lot of notions out there that somehow if we don't heavily influence that young brain, somehow that animal's never going to cope, even though we're possibly overlaying stuff that would have helped them cope better by artificial stuff that we've decided that outcome has to be. So that's a really important principle and very much aligned, I think, with when we're thinking more about dog-centered approach to things, is allowing ourselves to learn to trust the animal more. I think that's a really powerful point, Suzanne.
I think I think we have a couple of problems. One is we're not very patient. Step one. Step two, there's this concept, and it strikes me as, and all apologies to the Brits, but is colonialism at its finest. Like, unless you stay right on top of them, you know, those types don't actually do their job or show up or, you know, follow through. It's like, so you can fill in any of the nations that the Brits colonized. I mean, we took a whole continent, you know, we got way ahead of you. We're like, those are small apples, those little countries. We're taking a whole continent. Well done, us. Yeah, there's that concept that if you don't stay on top of them, they're going to get away with it. And I used to have my students, when they said, well, I can't let them get away with that, I'm like, well, let's finish that sentence. So based on what you're observing, please tell me what he's getting away with. I can't let him get away with being confused. Lord, no. We'll need to remedy that immediately. I can't let him get away with being in pain. I can't let him get away with being frustrated. I can't let him get away with being bored. I can't let him get away with being scared. It's like, correct. No, they're like, that doesn't sound right. I'm like, because it's not. He's not getting away with anything. He's having the moment he's having. So if we believe, and that is so woven through dog training and our interactions with animals, that if you don't stay on top of them, same with children are treated this way too.
Yeah.
They won't, and employees, they won't actually be responsible. They won't actually make good choices. They won't actually do anything they're trying to get out of it. They're lazy. Think of all the horses with the trigeminal nerve problem. So they're head shakers because it's triggered by wind or sun. So you get them out of the barn, and these poor horses are just flipping their head every which way from Sunday, sometimes like dangerously, like taking out the rider's face. And all the equipment and all the training, and you can't let them have the positive reinforcement of going back to the barn, which is where the nerves stopped firing because there was no more wind or light. And they're like, see what a lazy booger he is? It's like, wowzer. So, and people kept saying, but there's got to be a reason this doesn't make sense. It also doesn't fit with how willing this horse is to do X, Y, and Z. So that lack of patience, I bring that up because I think trust gets used the wrong way. We love that word. I want my dog to trust me. So it gets used in this way. If he trusted me enough, he would know that I would keep him safe. It's like, that is an insane assumption. Number one, you cannot. Number two, trust is not a blanket that if you just trust someone, like, you know, the whole spider thing, right? Doesn't matter if you're like, hey, you know, spiders are kind of cool. If your partner's like, I don't want to hear the S word, I don't want to hear it. Stop. La 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 la, Andy. Um, that's not how trust works. And the dog also knows you're not really very aware or alert or responsive in a timely manner. He lives with you. He's like, she didn't even hear that squirrel four blocks away farting in his sleep. Didn't even register on these people. Or the dog's like, you know, that dog over there is threatening me. Have you noticed? Are you gonna do anything? And you're not. I'm just gonna have to go and scream at him to go away. All right, blah 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 blah. So we have that, and then we just don't have the patience to let the animals show us that if we would just shut up, they actually can figure it out, but you have to let them process it at their time and their speed. So I had this really super smart hound mix years ago, and I forget what I asked her to do, but I could see her. She's looking right at me, and I can see her wheels turning, and she's processing. I don't know. Do I flip this weirdo off? Maybe I can get some more cookies out of the deal. I do understand what she means. I'm not sure if I want to do it. So I just waited, and we just looked at each other, and it's like, the request, it remains on the table, ma'am. And at about 20 seconds in, most of the amateurs in the room were like, well, this isn't working. Like, I don't know why we're doing this. At about 30 seconds, the youngest trainers gave up. At 45 seconds, most of the trainers are now beginning to mutter, I would have broken that off. I would have chunked it down. I would have. I'm like, I can hear what they're saying. Nobody made it past a minute and a half. And a little bit past 2 minutes, that dog who had just looked at me the whole time executed absolutely perfectly what I had suggested she might want to do. She's like, all right, I made my decision. But most people, if you have them wait for 2 minutes, their mind, they're like, oh, he'll never do it. I need to start again. I need to slice it thinner. I need to shape it. I need to. It's like, or wait. Or wait, is the dog still in the conversation? Let him think about it. Because sometimes, it's like people, they forget what the plot and they're like, don't know. What was the question again? And you'll get that same look from animals. Like, I was working on it, and then, yeah, I thought about squirrels. So,
I think that's really important, isn't it? Because I think ultimately everything we ask is a request. And if we see it in any other way, we're fooling ourselves, because the reality is the other will either do it or not do it. And if we're not available for that feedback and give time for that feedback, then it becomes that power struggle again. And I think even the notion, it's okay, us on the positive side saying we don't use the word command, we use the word cue. Well, if you're giving your cue and you're expecting an instant outcome, it becomes a bit of a command. But it's
the
not
circus pony, right? It's a circus pony. Now stand up on your hind legs. Now go down. Now run in a circle. Now bark like an elephant, right? Yep. Cue's loaded too. And I do understand there is great value in choosing language, right? So someone asks me, would I change anything in Bones? It's like, I would take out the word leadership, only because people don't understand what I'm talking about, and the word has gotten lots of bad press. That's the only thing I'd change in Bones at this point. Nope, I still mean it, and I still mean what I mean about leadership, but I don't know. We're just not patient enough, and we're not willing to hear no. Like we say, oh no, I'm very positive. It's like, okay, now what are you gonna do if the dog says no? And so the answer is often, oh, I'm going to slice it thinner. Oh, I'm going to up my rate of reinforcement. I'm going to get better reinforcers. It's like, yeah, but if a dog knows how to do something, or a horse, or a friend, and you say, can you do this? And they're like, no. It's like, oh. So you have to be willing to hear it. And then it's not like, well, what if I give you $20? I mean, maybe that is the correct response, but we're quick to jump into, how do I make this transaction work the way I want it to? If we treated our friends the way we treat dogs, it's like, yeah, I know you didn't want to do that, but I got $20 here. I got 50. What's it going to take? 100, 110, 50? Do I have to take you out for dinner? Do I need 2 bottles of wine and a chocolate cake? The hell, what's your price of admission? Which is what we're asking the dogs. And I think that's an indecent proposal. I think when the animal says no, first step is, oh, okay, why? Why? Did you not understand what I asked? And sometimes people say, why doesn't my dog do this? And I said, she understands you, but the answer is not about understanding. And they're like, yes, but if he understood it, he should do it. I said, oh, all right, if you would step up here on this table and sing happy birthday while twirling like a ballerina, I'd really appreciate that. And they just sit there, and I was like, I'm sorry, did you not I'm sorry, which part of that didn't you understand? Birthday, table, ballerina? They're like, oh, I understand it. Like, oh, okay, then why aren't you doing it? It's like, I don't want to. It's like, I just let that sink in for a moment. Just because I don't want to, I can, does not imply that I will.
Yeah.
But we are really big about trying to make that part of the equation.
And
Once I teach it, you will do it when I ask. It's like, wow, that is a ginormous assumption.
and I think this brings us into the area now where those who have invested heavily in thinking about positive reinforcement as a way of training start to feel uncomfortable, I think, because we have to recognize when we start thinking more in a relational way, we have to recognize the coercive potential of reinforcement. We have to recognize the expectational element of control over outcome, and how much we can get sucked into that almost task at all costs element then.
Exactly.
And that can be uncomfortable when we actually step back and think those are the dynamics that are at play here. And sometimes we have to think about intrinsic value. You know, quite often we might ask the dog for something, and we tend to have more sympathy for a dog, excuse me, who it's pretty clear they can't do it. But we don't give enough consideration because they won't, because it doesn't have enough value for them right now. Not that we have to add value to make them do it. As you say, sometimes it might be, as you say, the doggy equivalent saying, well, if I give you 20 quid, can you do it? But actually it's because it doesn't have an intrinsic value for them in their current state of mind, their mood state, whatever it is that they feel is important. Or they just need a bit more time to think about it. As you say, that time, it's just important sometimes because we all have pressures put on us. We all have expectations put on us. And sometimes we think, okay, do I want to? What's the cost benefit? You know, we just need to kind of, well, I'm not saying dogs think of in the same terms, but I think we can see what it means to have a bit of time sometimes.
I think dogs do think about it, and I can see like my old 14-year-old here, Flicker. She's a master negotiator. She from very early on, she would look at you. She's like, "Yes, I understand," and then she would have like a counter offer. It was like bartering, which I hate doing. But I just find her so funny because she's like, "Yeah, I get where you're going with that point, but I actually know that if I follow you into that room, the thing that's going to happen is that, and I don't want that to happen. So how about this?" And she would offer it. And so I just learned to teach her, like, I'm sorry, this is not negotiable. Period. And when I say that, her ears in German Shepherd style go out to the side, like, oh God, it's a non-negotiable. I'm like, I will sweeten the pot as much as I can because I know it's not what you had in mind, but I really need you to go outside so I can vacuum, or, the repair person can get through. It's a big sigh from her, and then fine. And I'm like, all right, thank you for compliance. So I'm not trying to lure her or bribe her, but I do offer a thank you gift. It's like, I heard you. I know that wasn't what you had in mind. Whereas if it's intrinsically reinforcing, it's so easy to get the dog to work with you because they're like, that's my favorite thing to do. It's like, if you invite me to a cocktail party, I should probably be pre-medicated. But if you say, let's go watch an anthill, I'm like, I'm there, let's go. And seriously, I would much more readily go share ant watching with somebody than go to a cocktail party.
But this is the beautiful thing about that example, because you can do that and have that because you have that relationship. And guess what? We all have to defer, like they had to defer in that situation. And there are things that we need sometimes. And there are things with my dogs that I need them to do that I know they might not be necessarily being the top of their wish list to do right now. But I think it's the level of self-awareness that we understand that we understand, okay, I'm asking a lot of you right now and I'll make it up to you, but I really need this now. And it's a similar relationship that we have, whether it's with kids or with our partners and whatever else. I think we have that element sometimes. And I think it is the element of awareness of those dynamics that is the most important ingredient potentially. When we become when we have a lack of awareness of those dynamics, then that power imbalance starts to become a bigger thing at play, I think.
If you're not aware, right? So I'm always looking for that feedback loop. I think it was Franz de Waal who talked about objective anthropomorphism. Like, you're an anthro, man. It's never going to happen. It's the only way you can see it. But can we imaginatively project ourselves into that animal's shoes and experience? It's like, okay, so we're guessing. And I've had people say, like, well, you can't do that. You know, you can't guess. I'm like, I'm guessing every second you and I are having this conversation, right? Even my husband of almost 30 years. Yes, I'm still guessing, and I'm watching for the feedback loop. And that is what the relationship is built of, right? I project out what I assume that facial expression means. I assume that that smile was that you were amused, or that I, triggered some light bulb moment for you, and you're guessing. We're always guessing. We're trying to guess because we're trying to find a point of agreement. Very few people step into relationships just for the pure conflict. That's just, and most animals, they would really rather just go about their day. So that concept there is so important to me, that it's about the relationship, but it has to be based on this feedback loop, which is, if I say something and I see your eyes flatten just a little bit, I'm like, oh, okay. All right, the Brit didn't think that was that funny. Ixnay on all the bad tea jokes, or whatever it is I was going to tell you. Yeah, for all I know, you actually find it really funny. But we are guessing all the time. But if I just talk at you and I don't really respond to what you're asking me, or what you're telling me, or how you're responding to what I'm saying, I'm an idiot. I'm just talking at you. And people do this to dogs. They just talk at them. And they tend to talk at people as well. The fact that someone's amused, bored, disengaged, getting angry, irritated, their eyes are glazing over. That's a one-way street. You're just playing your home movie, and to hell with what's playing on that screen over there. And this is why I tell people, if you want to know, do I have the right trainer for me and my dog? Ask your dog. Because if the trainer's got it right, if the trainer's reading the dynamics and the situation and understanding the dog as an individual, the dog will look at you and be like, yeah, what she said, that's why I can do this now. Like, I often, clients want to kind of argue, yes, but I'm like, let's just try this. Let's just see what the dog thinks. And then the dog's like, yeah, you got that right. You are correct. So, okay. And if I'm not, I'm like, what did I miss? And then I go backwards into observation. I think a tattoo every dog trainer should have on the inside of the wrist is say, I may be wrong.
Yes.
Let's just start with that. I may be wrong. And then on the inside of your eyelids, the tattoo, I don't know how you'd get one inside your eyelids. It's a horrible thought. But how is this for you? Because that is that objective or that objective anthropomorphism. If I were in your shoes, I would be kind of scared, or I'd feel overwhelmed if someone was chanting, go, go, go at me. And the dog's like, no, that actually floats my boat. That lights my rockets. I'm like, okay, it would freak me out, but I see that actually works for you. Or no, you're correct. That is way too much chatter. If everyone could shut up and give me time, I can get my job done.
And that's a powerful sentiment, and one that I know when I've spoken to other people, or I've seen comments in dog center care when they've referenced you. That's the thing that they've really taken from this. This is kind of that one phrase, if you like, sums up this whole mindset. How is that for you? Because it's waiting for that feedback, and that comes back to this relational model, this kind of give and take, and working things out and finding these different things. And I think we've done the general public a disservice with this push towards obedience and kind of this notion that training is the most important thing. I think it's also important to recognize that training itself isn't a problem. And you know, I see training as being a neutral thing along the lines of what you just said there, really, because it depends on why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and ultimately, I think the dog decides whether it's good or bad. I think that's
Yeah.
the key. But the general public have I think back to when I was growing up in the 70s here in the UK, when training wasn't really a big thing. We had Barbara Woodhouse on the telly. Good old Barbara.
Walkies, yes. Well, who does not know Barbara?
Interestingly, when I look back, I've looked back at some stuff on YouTube with her, and it is quite kind of, you know, I think if Barbara said sit, we'd all sit. You know, human
As
and dog.
long as she just rubs you just there, just there.
Yes. But some of the things she said were actually quite progressive and forward thinking regarding relationships. I don't think Kate realized that herself at the time. It was a bit of a mixed culture from dear old Barbara. But the point I'm making is, growing up, I remember us just being with our dogs. I'm not saying welfare is any better or worse, but I think we had more of an instinctive relational approach, and we definitely had the dogs growled at me what I need to think about my actions, not the other way around now that there's an expectation the dog shouldn't because that's being disobedient. So it's a tricky time, I think. And also, you know, we've never known more about the rich lived experience of dogs, but the general public have never known less about it because of their kind of focus on. I was in the vets not so long ago, and there was a dog in there absolutely to the verge of being shut down, really, because guess what? They're in the vets. On the weighing scale, great, because we just need to get the weight right, but then being barked at to sit. And making it all about the sitting. Well, the dog's on the scales, you can get the thing, but the person has been so conditioned that you must sit now, that becomes that notion of being stuck in task again, I think.
I would say it's why I just did that webinar of, C spot, sit or not. Why not spot? That was the name of the webinar. I was like, if I could pick one behavior we teach dogs that causes more grief and pain to dogs, I don't have it other than the sit. Because it is universal. Everyone believes that there's nothing to it. You're just asking them to sit. It's like, huh. And, you look around a seminar room. So we had like 65 people and it's like, oh yes, you're all sitting like, perfect posture and your, physical therapist is going to come by at any moment and balance a book on your head. They all look like, they've been out the night before and used their body for bar bets. I'm like, why are you sitting like that? Why are you sitting like that? And they suddenly become aware that actually of the 65 people, not one person in that audience was sitting knees and ankles together, legs stand upright, hands in lap. Nobody. Why? Because it's not comfortable. And there's a billion reasons why. So yeah, if I had to pick one behavior that I wish trainers would re-examine, just never assume it is a simple task. It's the freaking sit.
Yeah. And it
Grief cause
conflict, doesn't it? Because I use the kind of doors of the brain analogy. Really think about the brain has lots of little doors in it, and we've got plenty of doors open. We're more likely to be able to think better and make better choices and regulate better. But we know that pain, stress, trauma, they're all big door closers. And for the dog, the first doors to start closing are likely to be the doors the training's behind, because it has very little intrinsic value. And the doors that stay open are more likely to be the survival doors, because that's important to the brain. So the general public then, when they're looking for that sit, when a dog who just hasn't got enough doors open right now, it becomes a conflict now. It's a battle. That they have
Especially if it hurts. And the dog says, you've asked me to sit like 6 times now. Now my knees or my back or whatever is really getting uncomfortable. So can I just stand here? I remember a lady getting into a increasingly more violent and loud argument in a seminar. Her dog had been laying down next to her quietly for hours, good as gold. And then he just got up and he stretched. He was not causing any trouble. He just looked like someone, in the back row got up and stretched and, how long can you sit and listen to that woman talk? And she's like, damn. He's like, I don't want to lay down. I'm tired of laying down. I want some blood flow to my limbs. And she's, and now it's getting louder and louder. Now the dog is really starting to think, I don't want to play this game. Like, no. So he's backing away. So she's hauling him in. And now the dog's like, oh, you want to go there? So now he's all braced and she's getting so loud, she's forgotten that we're all standing there watching her. I was like, stop. What is it you want him to do? I need him to lay down. I'm like, because, well, I don't want him to disturb anything. I was like, he wasn't. And I said, is there some reason he can't just stand quietly next to you? And it was like I hit her with a frying pan. It's
Mm.
like, well, I guess. Like if that was a friend who said, I can't sit in this chair anymore, I'm not leaving you. I'm still paying attention, but man, I got to stretch my back. What would you say? She said, well, I would understand that. Like, and again, it was like I hit her with a frying pan. It just never dawned on her that this whole argument, because you can't let him get away with that. You told him down. Now you can't let him get away with telling you that while he heard you, he cannot do that because it's uncomfortable. So
Yes.
that whole sentence changes everything. You're like, oh yeah, that does sound like maybe something else has to happen here.
So we have to invite the caregiver actually to go on quite a journey of their own when they start thinking about things differently, because just as a society, as you say, we can go back to the colonial side of things, and we can look at capitalism more generally. We can look at lots of different things that build in, but even just in our own little existence, we're conditioned from an early age about the notion of behaving, and we've very much detached behavior and consequence, as maybe this is just part of becoming civilized, who knows, from the emotions and the feelings and the moods. So it's like you can feel it, but just don't show it. We're very conditioned to that. So it's no wonder we project that element onto our dogs, and there's quite a lot to let go of, actually. I've worked with a client last year whose dog, they wanted to go to the cafes like people do, but the dog was getting quite grumpy with anybody that would pass the table and that kind of thing. Actually, it's exactly what you described there, because when we started looking at going outside of cafes into the outside bit first to see what we're looking at, when the dog had more movement, it didn't respond in a negative way at all. It was that enforced immobilization, as of how you must lie down, you must lie down. The dog's like, I don't feel safe like this. And this is, again, another human psychology little phrase, really, that recognizing that there is often a big difference between what we're taught and what we learn. And that's what, so we've got to be really mindful of. So we might be thinking we're teaching the dog to settle down, but what is that nervous system, especially learning about safety and feeling safe and being able to move? And movement's really important for safety. Actually, we like to feel those kind of
To feel like we have a choice, that we can move.
yes.
Nothing, is more concerning than feeling unsafe, but you have no exit strategy, you have no options. That just escalates the panic. And, I've been preaching Maslow's hierarchy for a very, very long time, which is if the dog doesn't feel safe, that is no place to learn. And years ago, like I was harping on this. I was at an APDT conference speaking, and I thought, how do I get them to like viscerally experience what it feels like to be a dog in a situation where there's a lot of strangers, and there's a bias already that these are other conference members, no one's coming in armed with a gun, although it is the US of A, so it's never off the table. So I thought, I called it stand where I stand, see what I see. So I did a couple of things. One is they came in, I gave them little pieces of yarn, that's all. And I just said, this is yours. You need to keep this out. You can put it anywhere that someone else can see it and take it from you, but you may not tuck it away, hide it, permanently attach it. You have to just drape it on you. So they were like, okay. Then I had little paper bags. Some of them had little ladybugs, little lovely little, bluebirds, and you could trade those in for pretty hefty candy bars, like very expensive, giant Cadbury's. Or sometimes it had spiders in it or little baby snakes. It all depended which baggie you got. So we had all this resource guarding because people wanted to see if they could steal the paper bag away from somebody else because it might have a chocolate thing. But the best was that they were trying to steal each other's. So they became really kind of worried when someone shifted in their seat. They're like, you're not trying to take my string, are you? And so that went on. It got to the point where at the break there was like an assault in the ladies' room. And I thought, wow, this is the scientific experiment gone bad. Because I may have to interfere here, but I'm like, let me run it out. I felt like Zimbardo. I was like, it's not Zimbardo, but on a little tiny scale using dog trainers. And so someone walked up to me and they're like, what would you think if I tried to grab yours? I'm like, would you like it? And I gave it to her and her mouth dropped open. I'm like, what do you think status is about? And she's like,
Powerful.
what? It's like, yes, it's control of resources or access or being able to say here that's not intrinsically valuable to me. Because I also told them whoever has the most little strings at the end of the workshop, I would take them out to lunch on my dime. So we had this serious motivation for people to like steal as many things they want. And so one of the women afterwards wrote, and she said, I found this a very upsetting workshop. I could not understand half of what she was saying because I was so worried that someone was going to try to steal my string that I really couldn't focus or learn. I'm like, come on, take the ride. Come on. That
Yep.
was the whole point. So if we think the dog's going to feel safe because we say you're safe, that has nothing to do with whether or not the dog feels safe. Like safety is not because you told me I'm safe. Safety is unique. It's the individual's experience.
Yeah.
So he should know I'm going to keep him safe. It's like, nope, that's not how it works.
And the wonderful Rachel Leather, who is a trauma expert, came from working with humans, especially sexualized abuse, now works with animals, says you can't teach safety because the other has to feel it. And actually, when you think about access to resources, safety is a resource. It's a powerful one.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, yeah.
You will only make yourself unsafe if your basic needs are not met. That, it's clumsily referred to as food, shelter, water, but if you actually read Maslow, it goes way deep into what that actually means and looks like. So, yep, if you're not safe, that's the only time you'll abrogate your safety is to be able to, and of course we expand that in our heads to mean if I don't have this much money so I can afford the big house and the brand new car, I don't feel safe. It's like, no, actually you could do with a lot less, but that's that's your take on things. But dogs, animals, does this dog feel safe? If not, then my number one priority as a trainer is how do I put you in a position where you can feel safer and increasingly safer. My goal is if an animal comes into my presence and I work with them, then they should never leave my presence worse than they came in. In fact, they should leave better. I had a little Westie at a seminar, and I was on the fence whether I was going to put him in a seminar setting because he gets really nervous. He gets diarrhea when he's stressed. He does this, that, and the other thing. But there was enough there. I thought I'm gonna put him in the seminar. Worst case, she didn't live far away. I could send her home and take the little guy home. He's one of the most delightful little terriers I've met in ages. I mean, if he was a human, he would definitely wear a bow tie. He would have a PhD in some very arcane, literature that required understanding 5 different languages. Super thoughtful, whatever you asked him. Like he just did everything thoughtfully. He chewed his treats thoughtfully. He thought about what I was asking him thoughtfully. And I just had this big goal for myself, like, bite me if I'm going to send this dog out of here with his guts in liquid format. I have to keep him so safe. I don't even trigger that response. That was my goal for myself. So she took him out and took him for a walk and came back and I said, and she goes, it was only just soft serve. She said, normally it would just be absolute liquid. So the next morning we're all like, and how was Winthrop's little poops this morning? She's like, they were a little soft, but no diarrhea. And I was like, yes, that was just my main goal. How's this for you? I feel safe enough. You have not liquefied my intestines. I'm like, and we taught him some stuff along the way too. And he had some fun. Like he enjoyed himself. He sparkled. He left with his tail wagging. He was quite chuffed with himself. I thought, good. Wasn't that he wasn't smart. It was just that he did not feel safe.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, I think, is that we have a natural bias towards processing physical safety in others, because that's what our brain can look. So yeah, so you are safe, Susan. I can safe. But our own brain is just as, if not more, focused on emotional and social safety as well. And that's why people can be safe physically but not feel it, of course. And I think, and one of the big parts of emotional safety, especially, is not only feeling safe to even feel, but and this next bit is relatable to dogs, is the feeling safe to communicate how you feel. And I think this comes back again to this relational model that you've advocated for so much, because if you've got a dog who's feeling unable to communicate those current states, and especially social safety, of course, because especially if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that kind of social thing's quite high up. Actually, I think we can argue quite easily that for very young children and for dogs especially, that's actually right at the bottom, because if you don't have those secure attachments, you're unlikely to get the food, the shelter, the water, actually. So
Yep, you could almost make a little loop out of those rather than a triangle. You could just make that a cycle that just goes round and round.
yeah, and I think to be fair to Maslow, I think he intended to be quite free. I think it was his students who decided to create a model, but it's important for us. All these things are important for us. And Dr. Peter Levine, who's a trauma expert, human trauma expert, says that finding safety is the treatment, creating safety is the work. That is our work.
For that, I believe that is the truth with dogs. I mean, all this giant increase in reactivity, right? We have dogs that are feeling socially conspicuous. And in that same conference workshop that I did, when people came in, I gave them index colors of different cards. Different colors cards is what I was trying to say. And so at some point I would just stop what I was doing. I was like, oh, do you have an orange index card? Please stand up. And you know what happened. Everybody's like, okay. They didn't know they had agreed to that. I was like, no need to be afraid. You're among friends here. Everyone's polite and kind, and maybe 125, 150 people. And I was like, oh, okay. So are you comfortable? Could you just stand for a few minutes? Is that all right? And they're like, oh, sure. I was like, okay. And I went right on teaching and left them standing, all scattered through the audience. And this was just miserable for some of them. It made them socially conspicuous. And then another group I had, stand up and, I don't know, sing the ABC song. And then I forget what I had the third group do, but they got it, I think, that when we bring a dog out and we make him socially conspicuous, we have violated his sense of safety, unless he is socially skilled. Someone who's confident is like, okay, I'm not sure what this is about, but sure, I can stand here while you play your silly game. They're gonna have a very different experience than someone who's like, oh God, now everybody's looking at me. And there are dogs like that. They go to classes and they're just like, please, for the love of God, they're all looking at me. When the owner gets all excited and wants them to play, they're like, that's at home in the living room, Mom. We don't, they're all looking. If you could talk a little more quietly, they're all looking over here, Mother. Or go on, you love to do this. It's like at home in the shower. Well, I'm gonna stand up on stage and do this. So I wish people had that concept. Have you made your dog socially conspicuous? And you can do it by bringing a dog in who's extremely aroused too. Will set off every working dog in the room. Like, where were you raised? How dare you come into the social setting and be on that part of the spectrum? That is inappropriate. We would all do the same thing in a restaurant. If someone came in yelling and screaming and woohoo, you're like, excuse me, may I see the management, please? Like, what's up with this guy? But dogs do that, and they can be made into targets or acting like victims. They come in afraid. And so there's some dogs who will look over and be like, huh, this should be fun. Watch. Just to watch them jump out of their skin. But that concept where that need to socially belong, I don't know. I think we've expanded it to too big a scale. Like if your dog's well socialized and well trained, he should be able to go anywhere, tolerate anybody. It's like, why do you? So I think there's a weird expectation, but the dogs over and over again tell us, I don't feel safe here, which is where this reactivity is coming from. I don't have the skills to handle this well. And my arousals, I'm not really good at regulating myself. Put that together with people trying to force the animal to learn, perform, or putting them in unsafe environments. And what you will have is what we're seeing. I mean, I guess you're seeing the same thing in the UK we're seeing here, which is reactivity is bread and butter for dog trainers these days. Whatever that means. It's a ginormously sloppy umbrella.
Yeah, excuse me. And I think when we start thinking about things through a slightly different lens, the two areas that really come into focus are what we do in that first 12 months with a dog and how we deal with dogs who are, with the colloquial term, reactive. And I've shared videos of Molly, my blonde lab. She came to us at 16 weeks, and she was a really sensitive little girl. And I've shared videos of her showing us how she needs to navigate the environment in a way that makes sense to her. Even the term socializing, when we think about it, it can have quite a coercive element to it. It's the same with humans in a way. This notion of, there's been a lot of research into people who are socially anxious, who point, as adults, who point back to often adolescent times when they were constantly being forced into social situations. I did a little piece in the group, I wrote an article about this notion of, well, they've got to learn. You know, there's words that they've got to learn to be sociable. And that comes back to that difference between what we're taught and what we learn again, because for many of us, we find ourselves in very, very awkward situations when we're young, and we kind of pushed into them and we kind of muddle through. But for some brains, some nervous systems, some individuals, rather than learning to become sociable, they just learn to develop coping mechanisms that invariably become unfit for purpose. And I think that's a big challenge then. So they haven't really learned anything from a fundamental point of view about how to be sociable, just how to fit a norm that's been prescribed for them. And we can do that very easily for dogs, of course. And this comes back to something you mentioned earlier about, do we trust the dog? Do we trust that young puppy even to maybe that Mother Nature might have instilled in them some ways of thinking about, how do I need to navigate this environment? What do I need to learn from it for myself intrinsically, you know? So this brings us nicely. Yeah, sorry, Suzanne.
I think, they'll learn. It's like, this is very much like kids. To learn, I mean, first evident, this is where I like my approach to raising puppies is kind of like Montessori for puppies, as my vet called it. It has to be a prepared environment, which takes advantage of where that being is in their little life journey. So what's age appropriate, what's an appropriate challenge that they can work out. And then there's things that they would not choose to go work out on. It's just not intrinsically interesting, but they still need to know it. And I wish training would devolve into an understanding of, this is kind of what you need to know. So you can survive life as a pet dog. And this is nice to know if you want to study, French, knock yourself out, dog. But we make everything a must-have, and the older I've gotten, I mean, this is the puppy I have now is generation number 11. So I've been raising a lot of dogs for a lot of years. Every generation, I teach them less and less. With this dog, I've just enjoyed working on the stuff she finds enjoyable. It's like, I just need these basic skills under your belt. You need to be able to stay briefly. You need to be able to walk off with someone else. You need to be able to be handled. And I'm going to teach you cooperative care. So you're a part of that gig. Please come when I call to the best of your ability. Past that, it's all gravy. Kennel up if I ask you to, how do you be civilized, right? So for me, that's, what do you need to know as a social being so you don't get yourself in conflict? And the same would be true had someone taken me as a kid, and I had a pretty socially savvy mother. I mean, for all of her bipolar illness, she was the queen of relationships. If she was dying, it looked like, her counselor who came in to help her at the end of life was like, could I just get an hour of your time? I would like to discuss some issues with you. And I was like, aren't you here to minister to her when she was in hospice? But she's like, it's okay, honey, just make us some tea. And they'd go on and he'd leave saying, I just feel so much better. I'm like, that was mom right to the end, relationships.
Mm.
But she taught us, she did recognize that I was not my sister. My sister's an extrovert and I'm not. So it was a matter, you still need to be polite. Like you don't have to, if someone offers you food, you don't have to eat everything they gave you, but you need to take a bite and you need to be polite. If you're uncomfortable meeting people, you still need to be able to step up and say, because you're going to get yourself in conflict and people are not going to be happy with you. So there's that really fine line there, Andy, of, you know, learning what you need to know to get along. And I think that's part of being a social animal. But there has to be someone who can teach the lessons or create the environment or the interaction that helps you learn. So I was very lucky. I had really good adults around me who understood, even though I was shy, who still set some expectations for me.
Yeah.
Right. But then left me lots of room around the edges to be me. And I think that's what we need for dogs is someone who can actually help them. Nature only installs so much. After that, it's our experiences that turn those little neurons on or off.
And the key there for your own experience was having those secure attachments that you talked about at the beginning, to be able to think, okay, this is a bit difficult, this is a bit challenging, but I can do that bit, but they still are bearing witness to me as well and what I can do. And I think that's the important thing. It's the same for the dogs. And well, this brings us, I think, really nicely to talking about and maybe introducing to, for those who aren't aware of it. And this is what's so amazing, Suzanne, because I think, you've been working with animals professionally since, what is it, I think it's the 70s, early 80s or something like this. It's a long time.
77, that's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah. So you could quite easily think, I'm just going to back off a bit now and let them all get on with it. But you're not. You're constantly thinking about things, reevaluating things, and we've got the new FAT tool, the functional assessment tool, that really does bring in all the things we've talked about. How do we find a way? Because obviously, I think we've got dogs flying around everywhere now. They're knocking everything over. Sorry, that was a big bang. We need to be objective, but obviously what we know is that the richness of the individual's lived experience often lies in the subjective and the anecdotal, and we have to find a way of taking those observations, like you said, what do we see, and creating it back into a more objective model that can be easily transferred to other professionals. When we think now, we know the value of working in a multimodal, multi-agency way. You might have vets, you might have physios, the trainer, the behaviorists, you might have all these different people who are getting involved. This is a ridiculous lamp here that keeps getting knocked. So with the FAT tool then, you've really looked at the physiological, the cognitive, and the social. That's really an important bit and a new concept, I think, for some, when we look back at some of the metric collating tools in the past, that hasn't always been something that's been looked at. So over to you. Tell us about FAT. How did it come about? What is it you're hoping to do with it? And share with us.
Yeah. I've always been after the whole animal. So I've managed barns and kennels and if you had animals that you wanted cared for, you would really hope I was the manager because my attention to detail is famous. And that comes out of an unstable childhood is you become really tuned in to the tiniest details that indicate something is changing. And then you're assessing, is this better or worse? Should I run? Do I need to protect myself? Do I need to take action? So it just turns out that became a skill set that I was just as good at looking at a horse and thinking, that does not quite seem right. And then why? So that's just a skill set. And it's made me very, very good at what I do as a trainer. But I began to realize that not everyone could keep track of that many aspects. And that when I started to work for non profit organizations, I was somewhat astonished to discover that they had lots of handwritten stuff and lots of narrative, and narrative is a perfectly, respectable way to collect data, but you can't compare narratives easily. There's no set way to tick off what's what. So when in doubt, and my friends call me a artist in a lab coat, because when I get really like, there's got to be a way, I start to get very analytical, and then I start to actually chunk things down. Like, what if we looked at it this way? How can we get to it? So what I wanted was people to understand that, and I've been preaching this since the late 80s, early 90s, the body, the mind, the soul, all of these go together, right? So we can't say like, oh, like the little dog I was just talking about before, where the dog, was not willing to sit. Well, this dog's begun biting people, and she's biting people at night, and she's really irritable with other people. I'm like, so if we have pain, that has to be part of it, but it's also connected with her lack of sleep. And it's also connected with, she's not comfortable with other dogs she doesn't know. And. So I wanted some way to actually create a picture of the whole dog in a way that was easily graspable. So Carrot, which is my temperament assessment tool, creates this beautiful graphic that if you know how to read Carrot, you can read that graphic and pretty much tell you what that dog's probably going to do. If you give me a scenario, I'll show you the Carrot profile. Anybody who speaks Carrot can be like, oh, that's probably what's going to happen with that dog, which is fun. But I wanted one that was more, how is this for you? How is this for you? Meaning Carrot's about temperament, and that's not particularly malleable, changeable. But how I'm feeling today, how is this for you? It's like, well, today it's warmer than it was yesterday. But I do have a headache, and I did stub my toe. I was fine last week. I want to know, how is this for you right now is what I'm after. And that's what fat captures. So let me see if I can share my screen. And for the love of God, whether or not I have the right thing is a mystery to me, but my computer's got its own little fun, its own fun ideas today. All right, I'm just gonna let this play and then we can talk about it. So I'll stop it here. There's 14 different dimensions we're looking at. So physiologically, it's eating, drinking, urination, defecation, sleep, rest, mobility, and pain. And then for cognitive, learning, performance, stuff you already know, and play. Social is social, familiar, unfamiliar, absence of preferred person, social, familiar dog, unfamiliar dog. So anyone here who's been a caretaker for a dog knows this feeling when, whether it's a training client or it's a boarding client or you're a vet or you're a vet nurse, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. It's like, I'm sorry, what? If I'd known that, I would have known, like, oh yeah, he's not a good eater. He may not eat for 2 or 3 days. That's normal for him. Meanwhile, you're whisking the dog off to the vets, right? Or the client forgets to tell you this. You're like, well, that's an interesting piece of information that I really wish I'd known. So to provide the kind of care that really respects who that whole dog is, you actually need to have the questions answered that will help you see the patterns of response. Or if you're going to change something, like, you know what, we switched to that new food, now he eats every meal. It's like, oh, we know we've made a difference. So this is how it works. It just takes you through a little guided questionnaire. You choose what you observe, and it does the scoring for you. And you can just do one section. You could just do a whole section. You can do just part of a section. One of the things that happens too is when you're talking to multiple teams, multiple members of a team, how do you make sure that they got the information that everyone should know about the dog? And it would be good to know. It's like, this dog should not be crated next to other dogs unless there's a visual barrier, or this dog cannot be left. If you're with him, he's fine, but he will self-injure if you leave him confined here, there, or yonder. How do you know what you're going to talk about? One of the problems with helping clients with their dogs is how do we focus? What are the things that need some attention? And so this is what the graph looks like. These are incomplete graphs. But it starts to show you the changes over time. So this is all scored here. Green, everything's good to go. Yellow, Houston, we have a problem. We have issues that need to be addressed. Red, we have a serious concern that even if we address this, the dog's ability to function on these points is affected. Now, all of that comes down to a detailed narrative. So when you click on a score, it will create this report, which shows you exactly what the client chose or what you chose to create that score. So that at any time you can say, what's going on here? What's going on here? When you click it, it'll bring you to the report. So you can also do a follow-up. So in this case, we had a neurological event with this dog, and she really went kind of downhill. And it started to get worse. So her sleep and her rest was affected, and she was really significantly needing a lot of help. Did it up or down? There was not going to be any stairs in her world. And then we started with the UTI. So it's like, okay, so you can see like over 3 months, the UTI is resolved, the incontinence disappeared. And then how are we going to get her back to sleeping better? We decided which medications to add. And then we could also say, okay, we got her out of the worst of this. She's still needing help in that mobility and pain thing, but we have definitely made an improvement. So this, you can compare every which way from Sunday. Because also, how do we actually know whether or not we've got actual changes? Like, oh, I think he's better, right? So there, if you click on that, you will see the actual urination changes that I chose for Spider. So there was, is she continent? Nope. And when does this happen? All that starts to come out. And so you're asked about things like, what interrupts this? Which leg is this dog lame on? How do they like to eat? Do they need this, that, or the other thing? So sometimes it's quirks, sometimes it's preferences, sometimes it's needs. And the goal would be, how do we actually understand this animal, both as an individual, but also in this moment that he's having right now? Like how is this dog? So Vet for Dogs, you can go sign up for a 14-day free trial and give it a go. And we have both pet accounts, but we also have pro accounts. So it depends on how many dogs you're trying to assess. There's unlimited assessments for each dog. You do one every day from now to the end of time if you want. And there's a place also to store photographs, pedigrees, a vet report, anything except video can be stored in that dog's profile. So anywhere you are, you can call it up and there would be your rabies certificate, or you can show the vet, like, here's what I'm concerned about. So at a glance, the dog, the trainer, the chiro, whoever's actually helping you with your dog can say, tell me more about this. Tell me what happened here, Andy. Last time we saw this dog, everything was green. And now what's going on with that sleep rest thing and mobility? It's like, oh, well, our neighbors are rebuilding their house, or we're renovating our house, or yeah, the poor dog is bothered by all the workmen that are here during the day. So that's, in a nutshell, that's FAT.
And I think it's a game changer. And I think, because I love the fact that it encourages the caregiver, those around the dog, to be very present and do those observations. We talked earlier about the importance of waiting for feedback, and also this notion of by having both baseline changes moment, and also over time changes to point at things that might be more less potentially less dynamic but more chronic. I think
Mhm.
that's really, really important. And I think many behaviorists and trainers will get this, trying to get everybody just to kind of see the same picture, regardless of your own discipline, biases, whatever else. And that can be challenging when you're working in a multi-agency team. And that is the future, I think, Suzanne, because we recognize now, I do a lot of work with veterinary colleagues, especially with like Hannah on the CAM platform and Amber Batson and things. And I think we recognize that all our sectors, whether it's veterinary, training, behavior, we have to really think about what we do now, because it's not as simple as saying that's, kind of treating things in a symptomatic way. It's a recognizing that we're all greater than the sum of our parts, as is the dog's lived experience.
And
Um,
it's, yeah, one of the things that people have said is it surprised them that, they consider themselves, pretty skilled professionals, but in going through FAT, they were like, these are things, because it didn't happen with their own personal dog or outside their experience. They're like, I wouldn't have thought to ask a client about that, not realizing that it had significance. Or clients who said it was really interesting because I did notice that, but I didn't know it meant anything. And then we have one lady who has a boarding kennel staff, and she's like, this is the best tool for teaching my staff, because every time they go through this, like they're learning what to look for, and we're getting very systematic observation so that everybody is on the same page. But it's not uncommon for, like I said, many trainers don't realize that not sitting is, that needs to be considered. So like the dog I just worked with today, sleep was disturbed. This dog really struggles to self-regulate. She has bitten both people in the family multiple times. She's extremely irritable with people and with other dogs. But in the morning, she's a happy, sweet, affectionate little beast. I'm like, that's a classic. There's some pain going on over here, and she's probably physically, in an attempt to get her to think that's going to help the dog regulate, just doing more exercise. Like, no, we've created a negative cycle there. But FAT would show you that at a glance. You're like, what is this sleep disturbance here? And why are we so cranky with other dogs? And when does that occur? And how is that occurring? All of that starts to target everything. And then you back out and you see the dog as a whole, which is the goal. Like, if you can't see the dog as a whole, then we're just a blind man, examining an elephant. And I don't think there's a need for that. I think with a program like FAT, all the caretakers can be on the same page, and actually seeing the whole elephant, and not just, the stringy little hairy thing at the end. And someone's like, stringy little hairy thing, what are you talking about? This thing's like a tree trunk. It's like, no, that's its leg.
and this is really important, is because we talked about this right at the beginning of the conversation, really, but we do come with our own biases. We do come with things that we want to focus in on, and we can, I think our own judgments and expectations and biases can stop a truly compassionate, empathetic connection, because we're already projecting something else. And this offers that objectivity and an opportunity for that dog through all these different metrics and measures to share a bit of their lived experience, actually. Because I think that, we have to recognize, I can only talk again for the UK, but I think we do have a bit of a welfare crisis for dogs, not through deliberate acts of cruelty or abuse, but just a huge lack of awareness of who they are and what they need, actually. And I think this is how.
I think it's our problem with other people too. I mean, I don't know. I think we've gotten disconnected from the natural world, but that's another whole discussion.
Yes.
I once asked at a conference how many people knew what it felt like to reach under a hen and take that hot, freshly laid egg and convince the hen that she shouldn't really peck you hard enough to draw blood because you would like some breakfast. And it was only a certain age of people and a small group that lived in rural settings. The rest of them were like, they're hot. It's like, yeah, it just came out of a chicken's ass. It's a pretty hot-blooded little animal. They're actually they're quite warm inside there. But yeah, we've lost some connection to the natural world. So if anything, as one of my friends said, she said, I was getting really neurotic. The dog had cancer. Do I need to wake up the oncologist? And is this an emergency, or can I wait till the morning? She said, so I went and did another fat assessment and then realized, no, that nothing's really gotten any worse. There is no crisis. I can calm down. So she said it really helped me with my neurosis to put into perspective. What? Because how much experience can we possibly have? Most of us might have 5 or 6 dogs in our lifetime. That's it. Whereas some of us will handle 5 or 6 dogs a day, or in the morning, or the greater experience helped create fat for sure. A lifetime of dealing with dogs and horses. But yes, you can only have so much expertise if you've only had so many dogs. So this says, you know what, we can borrow some expertise. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can learn more about your dog in the process.
And it allows a really important principle, which is that the power of a study of one. And I think also the way that you've designed the app, the program, it guides people to think about things. Because another, using all these human psychology tropes and that, but this is an important one, which is perception truly is everything. How we perceive the world around us, how we perceive the other, how we perceive ourselves, drives a lot of our responses to the world. So if we're going to turn up to the lived experience of another sentient being, we have to be as mindful as we can about how accurate that perception is then, actually. And like you said earlier, the only kind of lived experience we can truly validate is our own. Everything else is a bit of guesswork. Even my husband, I can only kind of guess to a point about his own kind of state or needs or whatever, and we get better at that the more that relationship builds, of course. So I've shared a link in the chat actually for the FAT website, and I know I'm looking forward to kind of collabing with you about how we can think about different ways of really getting this into things, because I've got some thoughts on that. We'll have a chat soon about that because I think it's important for us, and I think we need to not only kind of educate people about what it is, but also recognize the value of it. And it would be great to have something like this as a kind of a go-to tool that we can all kind of see the value of, and start speaking the same kind of language, I think, and looking at things. Well, Susan, it's been amazing. Oh God, we've covered a lot of stuff. I knew we would, but it's been a really lovely couple of hours together, and I really value your time sharing so much with us. What would you like to finish on? What would you like to share with us at the end of our time together?
So just a couple little bits of wisdom. One, husbands are always a guess. Just like wives. It's just like, I don't know, I'm guessing that's what you mean by that. And
Yeah.
and if not, well, I guess I was wrong about that. Or you were wrong, or what did I used to tell my husband? It used to make me laugh. I was like, I was almost right. I would just not tell him I was wrong. I was just almost right.
So 50% love, 50% guesswork. That's fair. That's a good balance. Yeah.
It is. I mean, you're constantly guessing. And that's why I love Franz de Waal so much, because, between him and Goodall and some other greats out there, they said it is okay. We only have our human perspective, but we have the capacity to imagine. And we kind of project ourselves and think about that. And that's the beginning of empathy, that we can begin to do this. And I don't have any doubt in my mind that dogs have theory of mind. It's like, how could a social being not have theory of mind? But that's another discussion. But more than anything else, I think someone once asked me this as I was literally stepping onto the stage at APUT to speak. And they said, quick, is there's one sentence you would give trainers, what would it be? I was like, really? Seriously, there's a test before I have to speak? All right, I'm good at pop quizzes. And I said, see the dog. Like, everything I do revolves around, how do we see the dog? And that includes peeling the scales away from our own eyes. is making sure that I know what my biases are, or my fears, or what I'm concerned about. Or at one point, not being being an introvert, I would really desperately want to know something about an animal or a horse or a dog, but I didn't want to be conspicuous. But there came a day when I just thought, like, I don't really care what anybody else thinks. I want to know this more than I care what you think about me asking 42,000 questions. So I'm going to ask. Um, so we have work to do on ourselves to see the dogs, because we want to be really sure we are seeing as clearly as possible, which also means we have to go into that Zen phase of goal, no goal, which is I'd like to learn as much as possible about you, whatever format that takes and where we end up. I have no idea. A friend of mine once said to me very wisely, anger is only possible if you have a goal. And I have chewed on that now for 30 years.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's like, so if I have no expectations, looks like we could go left or right. And I really don't. It's not that I don't care, but I'm not attached to the outcome, right? Going left is as valid as going right. So when I approach an animal in that way, and I really see the dog, this is one of my 6 elemental questions, like, hello, are you interested in social interactions? Who are you? How do you go through the world? How do you process the world? What excites you? What scares you? What are your chills? What are your thrills? How do you even take in sensory input? What do you do with it when it comes flooding in? Does it shut you down? Does it excite you? I don't know. All of that is first and foremost just as a gem of information that exists all by itself, not in relationship to me. Just that is who you are, period. Now, I'm going to ask, how is this for you, this moment that I found you in? Is this scary? Is this pleasant? I mean, I love watching wild animals when they are at peace, when they don't feel worried. It sounds silly, but when I pee every morning, I can see the starlings going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and feeding the children. And the children are almost falling out of the household that they're in. It just brings me great joy. I want nothing from them. So how is this for you? And I can see the mother's like, it's very frustrating because one of the idiots fell out of the nest a little earlier than I like, but I can't put him back. So now I got to feed them and hit the one on the ground and keep him safe from the cat. So much more complicated morning for Mrs. Starling. And then may I, or can you? What are you physically, mentally, emotionally capable of before I ask you to do anything with or on my behalf? May I? And that's about, can I direct, inhibit, control, do things to your body, control your body, restrain you, direct you? And then can we together, with all our strengths, limitations, weaknesses, and dreams, what can you and I together, animal or person, what can we do together?
Yeah.
So when we see the dog, all of that is involved in those 3 words. See the dog.
So it's kind of really, who are you? May I? Can we? I love that as a guiding principle. Yeah, yeah. And especially the can we bit, because that's just so inviting of that relational thing. And it's a question. It's not a statement. Can we? And I will wait for the answer. Maybe we can't. Maybe we can't like that. Maybe we can't right now. It's the subtleties of those responses, isn't it? And that's the beautiful thing of building that kind of relational model.
Those are my 6 elemental questions, and everything I do boils down to one of those questions being asked and answered every time.
Beautiful, beautiful way to finish, I think. And thank you, everybody. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat a little bit. But I've also been really kind of engrossed in my conversation. But there's been a lot of really lovely comments. Thank you so much. Suzanne and I both have a look at them afterwards, and just thank you so much for your time. I've really, I knew this is going to be a really wonderful conversation, and thank you for being so open and sharing so much, and the huge influence that you've had on the community over the years. And I think we get stuck in doing our thing, don't we? We have our purpose, but I think it's good to be reminded sometimes of the ripples that we create, Suzanne, and you've created many, and there's a lot of love in the room right now, and there will be for a lot of people watching on catch up as well. So thank you, and also thank you for having such a wonderful backdrop, because I think that is quite an epic creation behind you. I know that was gifted to you, wasn't it, by a client? Was it
It
a client?
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a woman out in California, worked for one of the guide schools. And she just said, I just wanted to do this for you. And I thought, I I know how much work went into it, and it was just so beautiful. I thought, well, for the love of God, we can't put this on the bed. We live with 7 German shepherds. It'll just destroy it. And I was like, what do I do with a present so nice? I'm like, oh. And then COVID hit, and I was like, because I said, I wish I had a backdrop, that didn't look like beat up old farmhouse with way too many animals living in it, with a bed, Jemima Puddle Duck housekeeper. Yep. And I thought, aha, we hung that up, and it's just made people happy when they watch me. I don't know, they're happier watching the rabbit or the goat, and that's not one of my shepherds. It's just a shepherd. But yeah, it just tickles me how much people are pleased by it. So her immense gift just keeps making people happy around the world. So talk about ripples. That was an unsurprising, unexpected ripple. I didn't see that coming.
It's better than kitchens or bookshelves, which seems to be the normal thing on Zoom nowadays. Great. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in tonight, and do check out Fat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe look at doing something down the line where we can just focus purely on Fat, and we can
Yep.
make something we can look at, and especially getting this shared out to our colleagues in shelter and rescue, especially, and also behaviorists who are looking for ways to firm up their own ways of working and interacting with their clients. It's just a wonderful game-changing way for us
Yeah,
to think.
we can talk about that, and we can do some case studies too, like as a trainer, as a, rescue, as a shelter, as a vet behaviorist. These are the ways that Fat can be used to help you. So, and looking at real life cases and real life dogs is always the fun, isn't it?
Is great. Well, thank you, Suzanne. So just to let people know, the next live in the group will be on Sunday, and that's with Anushri and the part of the Barks season. We've had the Barks ladies talking a lot of things that really resonate with our conversation today, actually. So Anushri on Sunday. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. Please look after yourselves wherever you are listening in from, and yeah, see you soon. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks, guys. Bye.